Welcome to this very special edition of the KAJ Masterclass Live, the show which ensures that you profit from your time spent here with experts, either through their industry insights, information, or simply learning from them. And today we have with us Anthony Silard, Professor of Leadership and the Director of the Center for Sustainable Leadership. And he's an authority in the fields of relationships, leadership, emotional intelligence, relational healing, and personal transformation. So we'll explore with him how resentment and judgment undermine relationships, why forgiveness is so often misunderstood, and how our screen saturated world has fueled unprecedented anxiety and loneliness. Welcome to the show, Anthony.
Thank you, AJ. I love your show. It's an honor to be here with you. Thanks for inviting me.
You are welcome. Welcome to the show. Anthony, welcome to India in this online form. And I'm sure not just in India, but a lot of people across the globe will benefit from what we are going to talk right now. We'll talk about relationships, we'll talk about loneliness, and we'll also talk about the power of forgiveness. So we'll talk about all this. But before that, let's talk a bit about your journey, your background, so that the audience knows who they are listening to.
Okay, well, most importantly, I've been to India about 5 times. I've done a lot of leadership development trainings in India for both companies and NGOs, and love India. So I'm originally from Washington, D.C. We live here in Rome, Italy. We have 2 children. My wife's from Mexico, and our children are 12 and 9. And I'm a professor of leadership and organizational psychology at Luis Business School in Rome. So I teach leadership, I teach self-awareness, I teach collaborative communication. It all really centers on leadership. The idea that to become a leader on the outside, you first have to become a leader on the inside.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I want to understand, what is it you talk about, leadership also, you talk about emotional intelligence, you talk about anxiety and all the things, relationships, loneliness, forgiveness. How should the audience understand what is it that you do that they can benefit from? Why do you talk about leadership, and why do you also talk about all these things? Are they connected how are they connected from an audience perspective?
Okay, well, excellent question, Jay. So really the line between personal leadership and organizational leadership is very thin. And what I've learned is, first of all, we have to understand that leadership, if you look at the widely accepted definition of leadership in the literature, in the research literature, it's the capacity to mobilize a group of people toward collective objectives. So in plain English, it's the capacity to develop relationships toward shared goals. So leadership is all about relationships. And in fact, when I think about all of the thousands of CEOs, senior leaders of Fortune 500 companies, of most of the world's largest NGOs like World Wildlife Fund, Save the Children, CARE, of G20 cabinet ministers, mayors, people who come to me for leadership development, they're all stuck in some dimension of their lives, and almost always also some dimension of their work. And what I found, without any variance whatsoever, every single person who I've coached, and we're talking thousands, the reason they're stuck is there's someone in their life they've never been able to forgive. So that became the basis for my latest book, Love and Suffering: Break the Emotional Chains That Prevent You from Experiencing Love, because I realized that my previous book was called Screened In, and it was about how our phones, our screens, technology, how it's affecting us in our relationships. And I wanted to write a book following Screened In, really focus on how do we construct relationships, how do we build relationships. And so I have what I call the love progression model, where there are 4 plateaus in the journey toward love. It's the acceptance, forgiveness, gratitude, and love. And each plateau has an obstacle that has to be overcome. So to reach a state of acceptance, we have to overcome suffering. To reach a state of forgiveness, we overcome resentment. To reach a state of gratitude, we overcome judgment. And to reach a state of love, we overcome what I call incarceration. So it's interesting because people often wonder that, well, you're a leadership professor. Why are you also working in relational healing and emotional intelligence? Well, what a lot of people don't know is that my specialization in research is emotion and leadership. And in fact, one discrete emotion, which is loneliness, is the one I focused on more than any other. In fact, I'm one of the top 2 researchers in the world on loneliness and leadership, and why leaders become lonely, why their team members become lonely, and what they can do about it.
Absolutely, Anthony. Absolutely. So if I heard you correctly, you talked about that, because someone has not been able to forgive someone, so they get stuck. Many a times you find that a lot of people use that whole earlier experience as, fuel, something that can fire their, growth. And people do use it like that, negatively also, but somewhere there is a positive side to it also. When does it become a problem later on? Because all along it has also helped you grow. If there is no humiliation in life, you will not know about growth. If there is no push by any situation or person, either within friends, family, society, or anywhere else, you will not think about growing beyond your present potential. I want to understand then, when does it make you become stuck? When does it actually lead to continuous growth? Help us understand from that point of view.
Wow, fantastic question, Ajay. Well, let's then consider the nature of suffering. So for many people, suffering and anger, I call them flip sides of the same coin. They suffer, they become angry at the person that caused them suffering, and then this becomes the basis for conflict, wars, gang conflict. Most marriages is that one argument that goes back and forth, and they keep flipping the coin between pain and anger, or suffering and anger. And there are other people who they do something different with their suffering. They transform that suffering into growth, into passion, to help others. In fact, if you look at the word passion, it comes from the Latin pati or patire, which means to suffer. So you have, for example, I know in India there's a lot of imagery of like beauty and growth rising from the ashes. Think about it, Varanasi and other deeply embedded elements of Hindu culture. You have also in Christianity, you have the crucifixion, the suffering, the passion of Christ. In African cultures, you have the phoenix rising from the ashes. So there's in almost all national and cultural religious traditions, there's this idea that something beautiful can emerge from suffering. And that's really what I tease apart through looking at stories of people that have transcended their suffering, looking at studies in easily accessible to understand studies in psychology about how we transform our suffering into acceptance and then forgiveness, gratitude, and love. And I think it's important to realize that not everyone does this. So what I say is that most people go through life, leaders grow through life. So people who, and I say a leader, I don't mean a CEO. I mean anyone who is developing relationships with others towards shared goals. That's leadership. And that's the process of leadership that any of us can implement. And when we take that suffering, we have to understand that there's 3 outcomes when we suffer. The first outcome is no change, right? So a lot of people, I'm actually leading the largest study of secondary trauma in police forces in the United States right now, in California, Georgia, and Kansas. We have 10 different departments. We have hundreds of police officers and civilian staff, and I interview them. And what's interesting is that some of them, the trauma they experience, the suffering in their jobs is so great that they kind of numb themselves to feeling anything. And this is what a lot of people do with their suffering. They try not to feel it. But the challenge is if you try to force yourself not to feel your suffering, you also don't feel your joy. You don't feel your positive emotions. You go through a kind of sterile existence. Then the second option with suffering is that it really tears you apart, destroys you. And this does happen to people. And it's very unfortunate, but they just can't overcome the trauma, the traumatic memories of what they've experienced. And then there's a third group, and this group has been really growing thanks to the research on post-traumatic growth by two University of North Carolina psychologists, Richard Tedeschi and Larry Calhoun, where they find that some people experience trauma or suffering, and they use it as a basis to change the way they see life, the way their spirituality, their relationships, the way they see the world, their priorities. So let me give you an example of this. So when I do one of these interviews with police, I will first ask them, like, how has the trauma you've experienced affected you? So we've got like 40 minutes of the interview is gloom and doom, stress, burnout, trouble in my marriage. The list goes on and on, alcohol, drug abuse, what they experience because of the trauma they've experienced, right? So what they go through. Then after 40 minutes, I ask a question that stops them in their tracks, and the whole conversation stops. And I ask them, how has the trauma you've experienced benefited you? And like, excuse me, Anthony? Well, think about the person you are today and the person you were before you took this job many years ago. How are you different? How have your values changed, if at all? And now the rest of the interview is positive, and because of what I went through, I hug my children tighter, I make more time for friends, I really value relationships, and so on and so forth. And I'll tell you one example. I interviewed a bus driver in Washington, D.C., and this guy was caught in a gang fight on his bus, and he was shot twice. And one bullet went through his upper back and came out his shoulder. And he almost lost his life. And he told me, first he told me about how difficult it was, what he experienced, how traumatic. And then he shared with me, he said, when I asked him, how has it benefited you? He said, it's benefited me. I wouldn't even want to be the person I was before. Before, I just cared about dating beautiful women and money and clothes and looking good. And now I don't care about that stuff. Now I want to connect with people. I want to have real, authentic conversations with others. And I'm just grateful for every day to walk on this beautiful earth and to be alive. So that's really how our suffering, we can make the choice. Instead of letting it bury us, we can transform it into something positive in our lives. I'll end with my own example, okay? So I experienced physical abuse from a stepfather. When you're a kid and a man enters your home who's not your father, beats you up and sleeps with your mother, you don't feel like much of a person. This is how I grew up. Very low self-esteem. I ran away from home. I slept in parks. I just didn't feel safe at home. And for many years, that I flipped that coin of suffering into anger. And I directed that anger at others. I got into all kinds of fights. I directed it at myself. And up until my early 30s, I really wasn't going anywhere in my career. I'm 58 now. I mean, I was stuck because the resentment I felt toward fortunately, my ex-stepfather, the resentment I felt, resentment comes from which is again, and sentire, which is to feel. Resentment is to feel anger again and again and again and again until we become paralyzed. And so resentment is toxic. They say resentment is what you feel while the other person is out dancing, right? You stay there stuck in the corner of your room with only your resentment. And that's how I was. And I went on a trip for a few weeks to Argentina, hiking in Patagonia by myself. And I was on this long hikes through the forest. And I realized I had to forgive him. I had to forgive him for what happened. I started to like immerse myself into his situation and think, wow, okay, so here's a guy, a journalist in Washington, D.C., gets fired from his job, feels like society has chewed him up and spit him out. And the only semblance of power he could find was to assault a young boy. And that, that's really sad, but that's what it was. And that led me in writing Love and Suffering. I'll share with your listeners one of, I think, the most transformative exercises in Love and Suffering is I'll ask your listeners to do it now. So write down 3 columns. If you're driving, don't write down the columns, just think about it. The first column is think about that person you are unable to forgive, and think about what behaviors did they carry out that for you've never been able to forgive. What actions of theirs for you have been unforgivable. Then in the second column, for each of those actions, write down what character quality is associated with that action. So for me, for example, I might write, well, the physical abuse, my stepfather's physical abuse of me. The second column would be, well, what character quality is associated with that? Callousness, insensitivity, insecurity, weakness, so on and so forth. And then comes the third column. Now, just as that question that stopped police officers in their tracks, question I now have for you listeners is, so first, again, what actions did they carry out? Second, what character qualities are associated with those actions? Now, the third column is, who in your life, at any point in your life, would attribute that same character quality to you? So I did that myself. I thought, when have I been insensitive? When have I been when have I been not been thoughtful in the way I treated others? And it was kind of embarrassing, Ajay, because there are a lot of examples where I did the same thing. Examples where I thought about after my parents' divorce. I was like 8 or 9 years old. I had a friend, David, and we were at summer camp, and he said something I didn't like, but he didn't mean it to be mean or anything. And I just hauled off and punched him in the nose, gave him a bloody nose for no reason. And other incidences where I had been in relationships, hadn't treated the person as well as I could have. So that exercise has helped me, and it's helped thousands of my conference participants to really think through, okay, so in that case, maybe if the path to forgiving others is to be able to forgive ourselves, that we haven't been perfect in all of our lives either. And we did the best we could with what we had at the time, and so have the other people in our lives.
Absolutely, Anthony. Thank you for a lot of insights there, and thank you so much for trusting with your story. Trusting your story with our audience. Thank you for that. Now let's, in terms of talking about all the things, getting stuck, about forgiveness, about everything else, let's talk about leadership, bring in leadership in that. A lot of leadership is nice. A lot of them are also not very nice. Is it because they had experiences in the past? And because when we talk of leadership, we are actually not talking of leaders. Most of the time, we are talking of designations. Do you think the time has come for leadership to actually talk about leadership and not about designation? There has to be some other criteria for every CEO, every responsible person, because it is not just about them. It is also about a lot of people who are working with them and a lot of families of those very people. That is why this big problem about toxic workplaces and all these things. Because if such so-called leaders in the name of CEO, CFO, CXO, they roam around within the workplaces as leaders, how can you expect all the good things that you just talked about? Because they themselves need to heal, then only others' healing will come. If they are not able to be nice to themselves, can't be able to forgive themselves, how will they be having empathy, which is so much needed in today's time?
Another fantastic question, Jay. So leaders today, we have very few who are actually practicing leadership. As you stated, leadership is not a designation. It's not a position. Leadership is a process, and it's a process of what? Of developing relationships toward shared goals, mobilizing a group of people toward collective objectives. To do that, you need character. You need to. It's all empathy, compassion, authenticity. Such a shortage of this today, and I'm going to share something with your listeners I haven't shared with anyone yet, which is, what do you think the price of gold and narcissistic leaders have in common? So the price of gold is going up, and more narcissistic leaders are emerging for for the same reason, actually, because of increased uncertainty in the world. When there's uncertainty, people invest less in the stock market and more in gold. When there's uncertainty in the world, people select leaders who are narcissistic, because these leaders do so much posturing and so little empathy, but so much aggressiveness toward the outgroup. So I think the leadership mantra for today, for many so-called leaders who are not really leaders, is manufacture the enemy. Create an enemy where there isn't one, and attack that enemy over and over and over again. And by doing that, you solidify your in-group, the people who follow you. And this has unfortunately been accentuated by technology and social media. So anytime a politician posts a negative post attacking the outgroup, that's basically, spitting out insults against who they consider to be their opponents. Whenever they do that, if you compare those posts on Instagram, on X or Twitter, on Facebook and so forth, LinkedIn, if you compare those posts with the posts that they share that are emotionally neutral or even positive, those negative posts are liked and forwarded at 2.7 times the rate of those emotionally neutral or positive posts. So this is a University of Cambridge study. So the actual business model of social media is basically moving our whole society in this effectively negative direction, where we're rewarded for attacking others rather than befriending others. And the politicians, I really like the saying, when we point our finger at someone, we have three fingers pointed at ourselves. So we point our fingers at these politicians, and we have three fingers pointed back at ourselves. We elect them. And the reason we elect them is because when there's a lot of uncertainty in the world, people seek a leader who promises things that are impossible, but who appears strong rather than empathetic, because they think, okay, this leader is going to protect me. But then once that leader's in power, we regret having elected them, because now we have to be led by them, and we realize that, hey, maybe choosing Genghis Khan as our, to be the person that's guiding us is not the best idea, right? Who's going to, Genghis Khan, reportedly orchestrated the killing of like 40 million people. So even if you look at Hitler, it was the same model: manufacture the enemy, and then just keep on attacking the outgroup, and then your in-group solidifies and follows you. So we need to move past that. We need to move toward humble leadership, where there are a lot of examples in India. One thing I love about India, what I love about India is that not only is there much more humility in leadership than you find in most other parts of the world, but also there's a real culture of constructive debate. And I think part of this relates to like Hinduism having many deities. So there's like people, even in the time I've spent in India, it's amazing how you have like these very different gurus all over the country, and with many followers, and people become accustomed to the idea that, hey, you know what, maybe the truth is complex, and people can have different ways of viewing the truth that can coexist. Versus like when you look at in especially in the West, there's more this idea of right and wrong, heaven and hell, this kind of dualism, and which I think it leads to, we are the good people, they are the bad people. I can't tell you, I mean, with the police interviews, how many times I hear that why do you do the work you do? To put the bad guys in jail, right? Like, and to keep our country, our world safe from the bad guys. Well, there's a saying, which is there's so much good in the worst of us and so much bad in the best of us that we shouldn't talk about the rest of us.
Absolutely. Very well explained, very well put, Anthony. So, I understand about your forgiveness also part about that thing earlier on you said, and self forgiveness also. When we talk of leadership and workplaces and also in personal, leadership, personal lives, how should we bring forgiveness but also look at accountability? If we continue to forgive people, which is fine, one should, self forgiveness. What is happening is the people who should be accountable are forgiving themselves and thinking that they have washed themselves of all their sins. The people who are impacted, if they forgive them just like that in workplaces, then nobody will be ever held accountability. That is why there are even different laws also, witness protection and all those things, even within organizations also, in India also, outside also, in personal life also. You can forgive because you want to get rid of that burden. But then when to forgive, when to you hold that person accountable for their actions? Who does it? You can't wait for the, for some big day to come and then that will be the day when the person will realize it. It does not work anywhere like that, Anthony. So help us understand, how should a employee look at leadership and their accountability for their actions? Or should they just forgive and move on to another organization? How should an individual also look at this whole forgiveness thing? It can sometimes be, difficult to decide which way to go.
Another wonderful question, Ajay. So to understand your question and how we should approach it, let's look at the rawest form of leadership in existence. The rawest, most challenging form of leadership I've ever experienced is parenting. So you think about the definition of leadership, to mobilize a group of people toward collective objectives. That's what parents do every day. So how can we best parent our children? Should we just be empathetic and nurturing and supportive and ask them how they feel? Yes, we should do that, but we also need to be authentic, assertive. We need to have some kind of structure. And so what I like to say is, and this comes from David Yeager, University of Texas, Texas researcher, high support, high standards, and then I add to it high encouragement. So with our children, we want to have high support for them, but also hold them to high standards. And same thing, also, we want to be encouraging of them, that we believe in them and they have the capacity to reach those standards. So same thing for leaders. So I think there's a very important distinction between compassion and consequences. We, as leaders, we want to show compassion, we want to show empathy, we want to forgive, but at the same time, we also need to hold people accountable. So what we're talking about is, how can leaders balance empathy and assertiveness into one cohesive leadership style? I've seen in my life, coaching hundreds of thousands of leaders, that most leaders, actually, most individuals and most leaders, they're either really good at being empathetic, nurturing, supportive, or they're good at being assertive, firm, strong, resolute. But one without the other doesn't work. You need to be both. So if you're empathetic, but you're not able to be assertive, people will walk right over you. You become a doormat for others. If you're assertive, but not empathetic, this is these narcissistic leaders we're talking about, people perceive you as being aggressive, toxic, abusive. So there's this balance. I would say for your listeners, if you take one thing from today, it's that all dichotomies are false dichotomies. And now we're getting to the heart of the non-dualism that I think is at the heart of most religious traditions in India. and really throughout the East of the world. And this non-dualism that really, it's not about just being empathetic, forgiving, supportive, compassionate, or just being assertive, authentic, strong, resolved, but we have to somehow find a way to balance them. So how can leaders do this in practice? It may be, for example, well, I interviewed a woman. I'm working on a leadership book right now, and I interviewed this woman who was the director of the National Health Service in the UK, and she told me that most of the guys that were her the executives there, they would just go and tell people what to do, and no one listened to them. And her style was, she would go and she would ask someone, tell me how you feel about this, about there's this, whatever the current, maybe there's a malpractice issue that they're trying to figure out how they're going to resolve it and handle the press and handle changes in their operations. Tell me how you feel about this. She would be talking to people. Tell me your thoughts, your feelings about it, what you think is best. And then she would then say, well, I hope I'm going to be able to convince you that we need to X, Y, or Z. So on the one hand, she's first listening and expressing empathy, but then she ends with having listened to their views, what they feel, what generates happiness for them, what generates suffering. Now she knows the audience. She's able to assertively share what it is that she wants to do. And what I've seen is that if you look at leaders, most of the time, but not all the time, male leaders are the ones who have difficulty expressing empathy, and it's easier for them to be assertive. And for women leaders, it's the other way around. Easier to be empathetic, nurturing, supportive, harder to be assertive, strong, resolute. And each leader I work with has to somehow find this balance. And it's interesting because we haven't really talked about loneliness yet. Maybe that's for next time. But if you look at women leaders and why they leave organizations, there's this big movement in the United States called Lean In by Sheryl Sandberg, the former chief operating officer of Facebook. And she says, well, women should lean into leadership roles and executive roles and work cultures. And what's happening today is the opposite. Most high-level women are leaning out. They're like, you know what? I don't want this. I don't want to work in these male-driven organizations, predominantly male-driven, where people are working extreme hours. There's no work-life balance. There's no family-friendly policies. And a recent study came out that said that the reason women are leaving organizations in such high numbers is because they don't feel authentic in organizations. And as a result, they feel lonely. They feel like the norms of the organization are not their norms. And so you see that there's all these ways in which all of us, male or female, we need to really discover how we can integrate empathy and assertiveness into our own coherent leadership style. And like you said, Ajay, like, it doesn't mean being supportive and forgiving and letting people do whatever they want. No, then the inmates run the asylum, right? It's got to be, in fact, the people you lead don't even want that from you. They want structure. There's a lot of studies showing that they'll even say, like, they don't want anarchy. They want to have some rules. They just want to have rules that represent what they believe. And that's the challenge for leaders today.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You mentioned about loneliness. I will certainly want to understand at least one point from you about loneliness, Anthony, is that, in terms of, loneliness, who is more lonely in today's time? Is it the general people or is it the leaders? Who is it?
Everyone. So I've done a lot of studies on loneliness in organizations. And what we're finding in my research with Sarah Wright at the University of Canterbury in New Zealand, what Sarah and I have been finding is that leaders often feel lonely because they don't feel that their work is meaningful. They're there to achieve a certain mission, and when they don't feel they're achieving the mission, they feel lonely. Because remember the definition of leadership, right? developing relationships toward shared goals. They're not achieving those shared goals. They're like, well, what are these relationships for? Maybe these are the wrong relationships, and they feel lonely. Lower status organizational members, or the subordinates, the people who are working at all levels of organizations, can also be leaders. But if we talk about people that are more the rank and file, everyday organizational members, they often feel lonely for a different reason. They feel lonely because they feel a lack of connection with others. They feel lonely because those proverbial water cooler conversations are not happening. People are increasingly isolated, working more and more remotely. There's less cohesion in teams, and people feel like, especially younger people, they don't feel like they're getting the mentoring they need so they can succeed in their careers. And they just often feel like they want to be more emotionally connected with others than they are.
Absolutely, absolutely, Anthony. There is so much to learn about all this from you, and I'm sure a lot of people, a lot of leaders would want to connect with you, learn more about you, and learn about your books, and also perhaps be your client. What's the best way for them to do so?
Okay, well, thanks for asking that, Ajay. So, well, you can purchase my book, Love and Suffering, on Amazon. Also, my book, Screened In, The Art of Living Free in the Digital Age, all on Amazon or wherever books are sold, really. By the way, I also have a book published in India called Full Alignment, which came out in 2011, I think, with
Right.
IK Publishers a long time ago. And but I will say, for your listeners, if buying a book is not top of mind right now, I know times are difficult right now, I would like to offer 2 free books to all of your listeners. One book is called The Myth of Happiness: How Your Definition of Happiness Creates Your Unhappiness. The second book is called The Myth of Friendship: How Your Misunderstandings About Friendship Keep You Lonely. All of these books, the ones you buy, the ones you get for free, they're all filled with stories, studies, and strategies. And the psychological studies in there are really easy to grasp. I'm not making them just for academics. They're for regular folks. And to get these free books, all you do is go to theartoflivingfree.org/free happiness and friendship books. Once again, theartoflivingfree.org/free happiness and friendship books. And if that's too much to remember, just go to theartoflivingfree.org and scroll to the bottom. Well, I gotta say, Ajay, you're a wonderful host, and I really enjoyed being on your show with you. Appreciate you. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you, Anthony. Thank you very much. I too really, learned a lot of things, and there is so much to learn also from your books. So I'm sure a lot of people who want to connect with you, they will learn from all these things and continue to keep on learning with your latest book, also book and Love and Suffering. With this, it's a wrap on this very special edition of the KAJ Masterclass Live. Thank you so much indeed for joining us.
Thank you.